It was a quiet, breezy afternoon in the small town of Willow Creek when everything changed forever. In a quaint suburban home at the end of Maple Street, 42-year-old Claire Wilson was known to everyone as a devoted wife and loving mother. She had been married to Mark Wilson, a local business owner, for almost 20 years, and together they had raised 2 children who were now away at college. Their life seemed stable, ordinary even, but beneath the surface, Claire harbored a secret that would soon unravel in the most horrifying way. Claire's best friend, Sarah Thompson, had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. The 2 women shared everything: dreams, fears, and the minutiae of their daily lives. Sarah's son, Ethan, was a bright and charming 25-year-old who had recently moved back to Willow Creek after finishing college. He had always been like a nephew to Claire, but as he matured into adulthood, their relationship began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. It started innocently enough. Claire, feeling the void left by her children's departure and the increasing distance from her workaholic husband, found herself drawn to Ethan's youthful energy and carefree spirit. They would often sit on the porch, talking for hours about his future, his dreams, and his plans. Ethan, in turn, was captivated by Claire's intelligence and grace. What began as friendly conversations soon turned into stolen glances and lingering touches that neither of them could ignore. One evening, after a neighborhood barbecue at the Thompsons' house, Ethan offered to walk Claire home. The summer night was warm, and as they strolled down the empty streets, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. When they reached Claire's doorstep, they paused, and without a word, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, tentative kiss, but it unleashed a torrent of emotions Claire had been trying to suppress. She pulled away, breathless and confused, and hurried inside without looking back. For the next few days, Claire avoided Ethan, consumed by guilt and shame. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The memory of his kiss, the way he had looked at her, stirred something inside her that she hadn't felt in years. She was torn between her loyalty to her husband and best friend and this overwhelming desire that seemed to defy all reason. Unable to resist any longer, Claire met Ethan again, this time under the pretense of needing help with some household repairs. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. As soon as he arrived, the tension between them was palpable. They tried to make small talk, but it was futile. In the middle of a sentence, Ethan took her hand, his eyes searching hers for permission. Claire hesitated for only a moment before she gave in, and they kissed again, this time with a hunger and urgency that left no room for doubt. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and secrecy. They met whenever they could, always careful, always watching for prying eyes. Their stolen moments were intoxicating, but they were also tinged with fear. Claire knew what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't stop. Ethan made her feel alive, cherished, and wanted in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was an escape from the monotony of her life, a dangerous game she was willing to play, no matter the cost. The affair continued for months, hidden in the shadows of their small town. They thought they were being careful, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves. Sarah began to notice changes in both of them: Ethan's unusual behavior and Claire's distracted demeanor. She brushed off her suspicions at first, attributing them to her own overactive imagination. But soon, the pieces began to fall into place, and a terrible suspicion took root in her mind. One day, Sarah decided to confront Claire. She invited her over for coffee, and as they sat in the cozy kitchen, Sarah looked her friend in the eyes and asked the question that had been haunting her: "Is there something going on between you and Ethan?" Claire's heart stopped. For a moment, she considered denying it, but the look on Sarah's face told her it would be useless. So, with tears in her eyes, she confessed everything. Sarah was devastated. The betrayal cut deep, and in her anger and heartbreak, she told Claire that she never wanted to see her again. Claire left, feeling like her world was crumbling. She had lost her best friend, and the affair that had once seemed so thrilling now felt tainted and wrong. She told Ethan they had to end things, that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. He pleaded with her, insisting that he loved her, but Claire was resolute. It was over, but ending the affair was only the beginning of their nightmare. What Claire didn't know was that someone else had been watching them, someone who had seen the stolen glances, the secret meetings. A shadow shadowy figure lurking in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was coming, faster than any of them could imagine. Claire tried to return to her normal life, but it was impossible. The guilt of the affair weighed heavily on her, and Sarah's cold silence was unbearable. Claire thought she could put the past behind her, but the damage had already been done. Ethan, refusing to accept the end of their relationship, began to grow more obsessive. He would show up at her house unannounced, send her messages late at night, and wait for her outside places she frequented. Claire's attempts to distance herself only seemed to fuel Ethan's desperation. What had started as a passionate affair was now turning into a dangerous obsession. Ethan couldn't let go. He believed that Claire was the love of his life, and he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. Meanwhile, Sarah had retreated into herself, consumed by betrayal and heartbreak. She hadn't spoken to Claire since the confession, but something inside her told her that the situation was far from over. She noticed changes in Ethan's behavior, his agitation, his increasing distance from her, and the way he spoke about Claire when he thought no one was listening. It all came to a head on a stormy night in October. Claire was home alone, her husband Mark away on a business trip. The rain hammered against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie atmosphere that matched the turmoil Claire felt inside. She had spent the evening pacing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. There was a weight in the air, a sense of impending doom that she couldn't explain. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Claire's heart raced as she hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Another knock, more urgent this time. She opened the door slightly, peeking through the crack, only to find Ethan standing in the pouring rain, his eyes wild and desperate. "What are you doing here?" Claire asked, her voice shaky. "You shouldn't be here. I need to talk to you," Ethan said, stepping forward. "Please, Claire, I can't lose you. We need to fix this." "There's nothing to fix," Claire replied, her fear growing. "It's over, Ethan. You need to leave." But Ethan didn't move. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes filled with a dangerous intensity. "No, it's not over. You don't understand. I love you, Claire. I can't live without you." Claire tried to close the door, but Ethan pushed it open, forcing his way inside. She backed away, panic setting in as she realized she was trapped. Ethan's demeanor had shifted. This wasn't the charming young man she had fallen for. This was someone unhinged, someone who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "I told you to leave," Claire screamed, but Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her close. "You don't mean that," he whispered, his grip tightening. "You love me. I know you do." In a flash, Claire yanked herself free and ran toward the kitchen. Her mind was racing. She needed to get out, to escape. But Ethan was faster. He cornered her by the kitchen counter, his chest heaving with emotion. "What are you doing?" Claire pleaded, backing up until she felt the cold granite of the counter against her spine. "Please, just go." Ethan's face twisted with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I can't let you go. Not like this." His hand darted out, grabbing a knife from the counter. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she saw the glint of the blade. "What are you doing?" she cried, her voice trembling. "Put that down." But Ethan was beyond reason. His eyes were filled with tears, but his hands were steady as he raised the knife. "If I can't have you, no one can," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Before Claire could scream, Ethan plunged the knife into her chest. The pain was instant and excruciating, a sharp, burning sensation that spread through her body as she collapsed to the floor. Blood pooled around her as Ethan stood over her, his face pale with shock at what he had done. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to process the reality of his actions. Claire's eyes, wide with terror, locked with his, and in her final moments, all she could think was how wrong everything had gone. Ethan dropped the knife, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Oh my God," he whispered, backing away. "What have I done? What have I done?" Without thinking, he ran. The storm raged gone outside as Ethan stumbled into the night, leaving Claire's lifeless body behind, her blood staining the kitchen floor. The following morning, Willow Creek was eerily quiet, the storm having passed, leaving a misty calm in its wake. It wasn't until mid-morning that Claire's husband, Mark, returned home from his business trip. He noticed the front door slightly ajar, which struck him as odd. A sense of unease gripped him as he pushed it open and stepped inside. "Claire," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. When he received no answer, he made his way to the kitchen, his footsteps slowing as he saw something on the floor. His heart stopped there. Lying in a pool of blood was Claire. Her eyes stared lifelessly at the ceiling, the knife still lodged in her chest. Mark's scream pierced the silence, a sound of pure anguish that would haunt the neighborhood for years to come. The police arrived within minutes, the house soon swarming with officers and detectives. Detective Lisa Monroe, a seasoned investigator, took charge of the case. She was known for her sharp instincts and methodical approach, and as she surveyed the scene, she quickly realized this was no random act of violence. The brutality of the attack, the positioning of the body, and the clear lack of forced entry suggested something much more personal. Monroe instructed her team to begin gathering evidence, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the faint, muddy footprints leading from the back door to the driveway, already smudged and fading. As the forensic team worked, they discovered traces of blood in the hallway leading to the front door, indicating that the killer had left the scene in a hurry. They bagged the knife, carefully avoiding the smudged fingerprints left on the handle, and began collecting samples from the crime scene. Detective Monroe turned her attention to Mark, who was sitting on the porch, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry for your loss," she said gently. "I need to ask you a few questions." Mark nodded, barely able to speak. I don't understand. Who would do this?" "That's what we're going to find out," Monroe assured him. "Was there anyone who had a grudge against Claire? Anyone who would want to harm her?" Mark shook his head. "No, Claire was loved by everyone. We didn't have any enemies." Monroe nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Was there anything unusual about her behavior recently? Anything that seemed off?" Mark hesitated. "Well, she'd been distant lately, but I thought it was because of the kids leaving for college. We were trying to adjust to being alone again." Monroe made a mental note of this. As she walked back into the house, she noticed something on the kitchen counter, a half-empty glass of wine and another glass next to it, untouched. It was a small detail, but it suggested that Claire hadn't been alone when she was killed. She had her team dust the glass for prints, and then turned her attention to the phone on the counter. A quick glance at the call log showed a series of late-night calls and messages, all to the same number. Ethan Thompson. Ethan was brought in for questioning later that afternoon. He was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot and his hands shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he blurted out as soon as he sat down. "It was an accident." Monroe remained calm, her eyes fixed on him. "Tell me what happened, Ethan." Through sobs, Ethan confessed. He told Monroe about the affair, about how Claire had ended it, and how he had gone to see her, desperate to change her mind. He described how they had argued, how she had begged him to leave, and how, in a moment of blind rage, he had grabbed the knife and stabbed her. "I didn't mean to," he repeated, tears streaming down his face. "I loved her. I loved her so much, and I lost control." Monroe listened, her face impassive. When he finished, she asked quietly, "What did you do after you killed her?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I ran. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I just ran." The confession was enough. Ethan was arrested and charged with the murder of Claire Wilson. The trial was swift and, given his confession and the overwhelming evidence, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The affair, the betrayal, and the brutal murder of a beloved member of the community left scars that would never heal. Sarah Thompson, shattered by the loss of her best friend and the horror of her son's actions, moved away, unable to bear the weight of the memories. Mark Wilson, left alone in the home that had once been filled with love and laughter, struggled to find a reason to go on. The neighborhood, once a place of comfort and safety, was now overshadowed by the darkness of that terrible night.